Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV, and we are now halfway through Codes and Code Breaking Week, and we're off to the Pacific, and our first real look at the US involvement in code breaking. Yesterday was all about Bletchley Park, vital, of course, and the day before we had Dave Alexander giving us kind of an overview of codes and how they work generally, but today we're doing a kind of a deep dive into the Pacific campaign. There'll be some people mentioned that you have heard of, quite a few you haven't heard of, some battles you have heard of, some incidents you haven't heard of. And again, I have kind of gone for the best expert I can find on this. Our guest, 30 plus years in the US Navy, Chief Master Petty Officer, you name it, he's done it. And he's been studying the people we're talking about for about as many years as he's been in the Navy. So I've got the best expert for you. So without further ado, Matt Zullo, how are you today?
Very well. Thanks for having me.
So, you've been seeing what we've done already. And, we, as I said there, we're talking about the Pacific campaign particularly. And in this case, what's going to be when people get to the PowerPoint later on, this story today starts immediately after the First World War. It doesn't start in the Second World War. It starts a bit earlier than that. So that's not to say necessarily that the US were ahead of the game compared to other countries, because everybody's, as we found out on Monday, are working at various kind of aspects of messages and coding and what have you. But in your case, how did you discover this story? Was it when you, I know you were involved in SIG when you were in the service, but did you discover the wartime story when you were in the service, or was it after you retired?
It started while I was active duty in the Navy. Yeah, certainly. Back in 2001, I attended the Naval Cryptologic Veterans Association annual reunion, and it happened to be in Boston, Massachusetts. And there was a set of older gentlemen who were part of that group, and people seemed to give them extra deference, talking about them in hushed terms, mentioning the term "on the roof gang," and I really had no idea what that meant at the time. But it was very interesting to meet these. I met probably a dozen of these guys or so that weekend at the reunion, and every time I talked to them and asked them, about their experience as a cryptologic veteran, they were very closed-mouthed about it. They didn't like to talk about their own stories, and instead they would turn the stories around to me or my shipmates or other people. They were just very hesitant to talk about themselves. So it piqued my curiosity because, as I mentioned, there were other people who were just really effusive about what these gentlemen had done during World War II. So that started my interest in the group, and it turned out that I did my master's thesis on the roof gang. I went to the U.S. National Archives. I had access to the U.S. Center for Cryptologic History, and I got a lot of information, and I was successful in writing a thesis. But I had so much information that I felt like there was more that I could share with the world. Certainly, the thesis wasn't going to get shared with the world, but my wife convinced me, and I went along with what she said, and I was lucky enough to be able to publish these two books about the On the Roof Gang.
And of course, folks, as usual, the links to purchasing the books are in the description below, as is Matt's website. So I urge you to go out and do that. And when we're talking with David Kenyon yesterday a little bit about the fame of Bletchley Park since World War II, and when you go to the shop there are kind of two types of books in some way. There's ones about the hard kind of mathematical aspect of code breaking, and there's books with kids where you can make your own codes and explain how the bomb works and the computers. And then you have those kind of books that are about the people, the Bletchley girls, and about the young women who went off and men. And in your books, you actually cover both. You kind of go into the technical side of it, but you also talk about the people, because ultimately, as we talked about the 4-volume set of military intelligence books on with David yesterday, it can get a bit heavy just reading about mathematical and technical procedures. The people's stories is what lifts it and takes it to another level. And you kind of you've added a kind of the character dialogue to your book as well. You've taken the facts, and then you've kind of built up a story around it. So it makes it eminently readable for the people who perhaps haven't got prior knowledge of mathematics, and which is some of the basic skills you need to understand the cryptology aspect of it. So that's a unique approach. But anyway, we could be rambling on about background. Let's deep dive in, because you've presented us with lots and lots of slides, lots and lots of information. I'm really looking forward to this one, folks. We'll probably do the majority of the questions, if there are any, towards the end of the show. I think actually Matt will be answering all the questions as we go along, because the PowerPoint is really good. And so I think he should explain it during the talk. But basically, I'll hand over to you, Matt. So when you need me to move on, just say next. And folks, just keep commenting. And I appreciate, even if we don't respond to all your comments, I love reading what you have to say. Sometimes I go back and I watch the show muted because I can't stand hearing my own voice, but I mute myself. And then I just read all the comments. And it's been really gratifying how well you are taking to World War II TV, folks, and how you are creating our own little community there. It's really nice to see that aspect, not something I didn't kind of anticipate right at the beginning. But anyway, Matt, over to you. Let's talk about the On the Roof gang and basically explain to the good folks watching who the hell these guys are.
Okay, will do. You can go to my my first slide. So the truth is that this, as you mentioned, started long before World War II, right after World War I, as a matter of fact. The U.S. Navy had no SIGINT, had no cryptologic capabilities whatsoever at the time. There was some direction finding capacity on the East Coast for the Atlantic, but really there was no intelligence or intelligence collection or code breaking happening in the U.S. Navy. That started to change in the early 20s when the U.S. FBI and Office of Naval Intelligence teamed up on a series of break-ins in the Japanese consulate in New York City. And they broke into a safe or two and photographed lots of documents and brought them back and analyzed them. And it turned out that one of those documents that they photographed was a large book that was the Imperial Japanese Navy Code Book, the 1918 Operations Code. And it was all in Japanese, obviously. So the Office of Naval Intelligence took it upon themselves to hire a couple of translators to translate that book to see what it might mean. And about the same time in the Pacific, U.S. Navy radiomen began to hear telegraphic code interfering on their nets. Very, very loud, very powerful code that wasn't Morse code. It sounded like Morse code, but there are many more characters that these guys didn't understand. So a handful of them, Harry Kidder included, began to try to figure out this new code. And it turned out that this code was based on the Japanese katakana alphabet or syllabary. And the katakana has 50 or 51 letters in it instead of 26. So that's why there were so many more telegraphic codes in it. And there were, again, a handful of these guys, the most preeminent of which was Harry Kidder, began to teach themselves this code. Meanwhile, back in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Navy was trying to figure out what to do with that code book that they had stolen and translated. And they hired a young lady named Agnes Meyer, who later becomes very, very famous in U.S. Navy code-breaking circles and becomes, if not the preeminent codebreaker in the Navy, one of the very best codebreakers that the Navy had to offer. And she started to delve into this code book and to see what we might be able to do with it.
And would it be fair to say, Matt, that the same kind of oddballs are being searched for by the American military as what happened famously in Bletchley Park a decade or two later, in that conventional maybe military thinking is maybe not always going to provide the solution to this kind of thing? You need people who are inventive, have different ways of thinking, and frankly very, very clever, because it's a very different field. You can be a good platoon commander, or I guess even a chief petty officer, by training within the Navy system. But to do something like this, which is a new science, you kind of need new people to develop the science, because the science as yet doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And these next three folks, while I introduce them, while they're not part of the On the Roof gang, were all kind of cut out of that cloth.
Pioneers, yeah.
Agnes Meyer was she was a polyglot. She knew multiple languages. She was a math teacher. She was just a very kind of introvert, and just a little bit different than her contemporaries. And if you go to the next slide, there's another very odd kind of duck, if you will. He was a U.S. Navy officer and a lieutenant at the time in the early 20s on board USS Finch, and he was the communications officer on board USS Finch. And the Navy brought him back to Washington, D.C. to help figure out this code book that they had stolen. And again, they had identified him because of his very, very unique knack of playing a new game called bridge and doing new puzzles called crossword puzzles, which were all kind of new at the time. And Lawrence Safford happened to be one of those guys. They set up a new office called the Research Desk in the Department of Naval Communications. So again, there was no cryptologic office. There was no SIGINT office yet. It was part of Naval Communications. And by that time, Harry Kidder was no longer in the Pacific. He was assigned to the Naval Radio Station in Cheltenham, Maryland. And when Lawrence Safford found out that Kidder was local, he brought him into the office, into the research desk, to help him and Agnes to try to figure out what to do with this, with all of this code stuff.
And it's just worth mentioning at this point, Matt, that this is in the 1920s when a great majority of the inhabitants of the world are believing that we've had the greatest war we're ever going to have. It wasn't the First World War yet. It was still the Great War. And we're going to live in blissful kind of peace for the rest of our existence. But in fact, all around the world in the 20s and 30s, everybody is, if not anticipating, they're certainly kind of preparing for the fact that there may well be another global conflict on the horizon. So it's two kind of worlds existing at the same time, those living in naive bliss and those being completely prepared for the fact it's all going to kick off again. It just will need the right idiot tyrant to start it all off again. My granddad always referred to World War I and World War II as one big war with an extended halftime break.
Yeah, could very well be. But now from the U.S. Navy perspective, we've got our all-star team together. Yeah. Harry Kidder, Lawrence Safford, and Agnes Meyer. And they decided, you can hit the next slide. I'll add in one very famous name, of course, Joseph Roshford. He becomes famous at the Battle of Midway, but he didn't get his start at the Battle of Midway or even after World War II started. He actually got his start in the mid-20s by cycling through this research desk office where Lawrence Safford taught people how to do the code breaking that he was teaching himself how to do. After Safford transfers on his normal rotation back out to the fleet, Joseph Roshford actually takes over as the lead of this research desk. And the plan that Safford came up with, and that Roshford and Kidder and Meyer executed, was to set up intercept stations around the world, around the Pacific. And the first one that they set up was in Shanghai, China, and they called it Station Able. And there were a couple of other radiomen there who had gained some proficiency at copying this katakana code. One of them was Norman Chauncey. The other one was Stephen Lesko. They're also identified as two of the founding members of this On the Roof gang. And I'll get to why they're called the On the Roof gang in just a minute. They also set up an intercept station in Guam, and they called it Station Baker. And there was another radioman there who helped set up that site named Malcolm Lyon.
And just to interrupt, Matt, because I like interrupting because it is my show. When you go and speak to people and with your books, because of the fame of the wartime exploits that we'll get to later, are people surprised that these activities and people like Rochefort were involved actually kind of 2 decades earlier? I think people probably think it all kind of began in 1941 post Pearl Harbor, when in fact actually this work had been going on for a long time before. Does that surprise people when they find out?
Well, I think that certainly there is some knowledge that there's always conspiracy theories about Pearl Harbor and what we knew about Pearl Harbor before Pearl Harbor actually happened. So there's some, inkling that there was some activity, some code breaking activity before Pearl Harbor. But you're right. The fact that it started in the early 20s and really started to gain momentum by the end of the 20s. And by 1930, we were in full swing, having intercept operators at 3 or 4 different sites around the Pacific. Yeah, that's a story that most people don't know.
And just to say, we're bringing it to you folks on World War II TV. That's that little bit of a deeper dive we like to think we do here, bringing you not just the stories you know, but expanding on the stories you know and actually providing that information that perhaps is less well known. So yeah, people are enjoying it already. So as am I. So yeah, we'll move on.
Perhaps the most famous of the intercept sites that that the U.S. Navy set up was Station Hypo, and the reason it's famous is because of Roshford and the Midway story. But the truth of the matter is that Roshford was never stationed at Station Hypo. Station Hypo was actually the intercept site at that opened in Little Guadalupe, and it actually moved to a couple of different locations during the run up to World War II. But Pearl Harbor was never one of the locations at Station Hypo. So we'll get to it, and I'll explain exactly where Roshford was instead of Hypo. But this is just to illustrate that Station Hypo in Hawaii was an intercept site that was set up as early as 1928.
Brilliant stuff. And
then the training began, and this is where the term "on the roof gang" came from. So on where the Washington Monument and Lincoln Memorial and Vietnam Memorial stands today in Washington, D.C., there used to be a very large building called the Main Navy Building. Right next to it was the Army Munitions Building. This is where the headquarters of the Army and Navy were prior to World War II. And the buildings, you can see them there, had one of the buildings had a very small concrete blockhouse classroom built on top of it. And this is where the On the Roof gang learned how to copy the katakana code. Harry Kidder was the instructor for the first 3 classes, and then some of the other more experienced operators came in and were instructors as well. But they all attended this training on the roof of the Main Navy Building. And again, that's where they got their name, the On the Roof gang. And the training really consisted of learning that katakana telegraphic code. Again, it was asking radiomen who were experts in Morse code to learn this entirely different telegraphic code. Some of them were very good at it. Some of them had struggled with it. But the ones who became very good at it stuck around and continued to do the intercept of this katakana telegraphic code during the war.
And just to interrupt you, is this an encrypted code, or is it transmitted openly?
So just like Morse code, it's carrier wave. So it's a series of dits and das, or dots and dashes, over the airwaves. It was anybody who had the right radio equipment could hear these dits and das and could potentially copy down what was going on. Now, the messages that they were transmitting certainly most of them were encrypted, and that's where the code breaking comes in. So certainly the On the Roof gang operators were code breaking, as it were, by listening to this katakana telegraphic code. But then, the messages then had to go to other places to be decrypted to try to understand exactly what was being transmitted. While they were at this schoolhouse, they also learned something called traffic analysis, where you could try to determine, which call signs were headquarters elements, which ones were submarines, which ones were surface ships, which ones were aircraft, and you can do that by analyzing who talks to who, and that's called traffic analysis. And the last thing that they learned was called high-frequency direction finding. You can hit the slide here. High-frequency direction finding, and that is by using a rotational antenna, you could determine the relative direction from the intercept site where the transmission was coming from by rotating and listening to the signal strength. And you can see different types of HF-DF antennas there as they learned how to use them. And then the last intercept station that they set up in 1929 was called Station Cast, and was in Olongapo, Philippines. And they transferred some folks from Station Baker in Guam to open up the place, and then they started sending graduates of the On the Roof Gang training to all 4 different sites now. And the first real test of this new intercept capability happened in 1930 when there were intercept sites in Shanghai, China, Guam, Philippines, and Hawaii. And the Imperial Japanese Navy had an exercise called the Grand Maneuvers in 1930. And intercept happened at all 4 of these locations, and they shipped all of this intercept back to Washington, D.C. to be decoded. And after 3 or 4 months of reconstruction, they got a pretty good idea of what Japan was doing. And as early as 1930, they could tell that the Imperial Japanese Navy was preparing for war against the United States. Just a reminder, Japan was already at war with China at this time, and needed to fuel their wartime efforts against China. And the fuel that they needed was in Southwest Pacific, right? It was in the Solomon Islands and all of those islands just north and northeast of Australia, where the rubber and oil that would fuel their wartime efforts.
And just maybe a stupid question for you, Matt, but I don't mind asking it. You know, we're living in an age where, you know, freedom of speech and what is right and not right, and people, you know, have access to our mobile phones and data, and was there any kind of questions about the morality of this? I mean, because the USA is not at war with anybody in the 1920s or 30s, and you're listening into another nation's radio traffic. How does this sit legally?
Yeah, so you know, the radio waves are out there, and it was never deemed illegal to do any of these things. There was a question from our own Secretary of State, Henry Stimson, who later, well, actually, it was around this time, who said, "Gentlemen, don't read other gentlemen's mail," and that's what actually shut down Herbert Yardley's Black Chamber, which was a joint U.S. government and Army intercept and code breaking activity up in New York City. That actually got shut down because of this Secretary of State decision. But the U.S. Navy, because it wasn't beholden to the State Department, could continue to fund this, and they did. They continued to have this this intercept enterprise, if you will.
Yeah.
So in 1933, same thing happened. They had another grand maneuvers. This time, the Navy sent some intercept operators aboard the USS Gold Star to do intercept as on top of the 4 intercept sites that were already existing. And again, they had very similar successful results in intercepting the exercise. Just after the exercise, you can hit the slide now. The Station Hypo moved from Wailupe. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner of that map. This is a map of Oahu, by the way, and you can see Pearl Harbor sort of on the southern shore of Hawaii. The intercept site moved from Wailupe directly north to Hia, just to get bigger and better spaces. And Harry Kidder was in charge of that move.
Cool.
And Station Cast was another one that moved. It outgrew outgrew the spaces that they had along Apo. They moved first from Olongapo to Mariviles, and then later on to Cavite Naval Base in Manila Bay. And then the last move that Station Cast made was their final move before World War II started, and they moved to Corregidor Island. And this is where General MacArthur had his headquarters, famously in a tunnel called the Malinta Tunnel. And the U.S. Navy built their own tunnel, much smaller than the Malinta complex of tunnels, but it was an intercept tunnel specifically designed to do the intercept that the On the Roof Gang was doing.
And were the moves made for strategic reasons or for intercepting reasons in terms of like atmospherics or reception?
Yeah, it was different each time. So the move from Olongapo was simply because they outgrew their space. Then they moved to Mariveles, but that was so isolated that the men were not happy there. They were losing them to attrition, and they wouldn't come back because Mariveles was just in the middle of nowhere. Cavite was seen as a bustling little city because of the big U.S. Navy presence at Cavite. The problem was, because it was such a big Navy base, there was too much interference there to do good intercept from that location. The location at Corregidor was a much better site for the intercept. So again, there's different reasons for the moves.
And we just have Chris is asking why move to the east side of Oahu, I can't say that word, behind the mountains.
Yeah, so they actually moved into an abandoned radio facility. So it already had the towers for the antennas, and that's why they moved to Hia. Whoever asked the question is right to identify the fact that the intercept wasn't very good from Hia, and they actually moved to the top of the mountains at a location called Wahiwa later on.
Super, right.
So
there's the position at Corregidor.
Yeah, Corregidor. This is just the only photo that I've ever found of the intercept operators inside the tunnel at Corregidor.
And just while we're on the subject, because we're rattling through this, is really enjoying it. You know, you're talking about in some cases that these positions being near U.S. naval bases. How does security work on this? Because people working on here, they're part of something that is kind of secret. So, I know everybody in the service has to agree to not divulge stuff. That's the kind of basic principle of being in the military. But what kind of precautions are employed for these people so they don't kind of give away things? And just exactly, people ask them, so what do you do, mate? You know, that if you're in the British Army, you go to a NAFI, someone says, where are you from, mate? What do you do? How does it kind of work in this environment?
Well, all of the operators, as they were indoctrinated into the on the roof gang, and before they actually started their classes, they were forced to sign a security agreement which said that they will never divulge anything about their work. And that's why even in 2001 I was unable to get in any of the on the roof gang to talk about their accomplishments. But you're right, you know, if they're at a U.S. Navy facility, people are going to recognize that, you know, there's a separate facility over there. What are they kind of doing? And it was sort of one of those, worst kept secrets kind of things, where there was a wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of acknowledgement that there were these U.S. Navy radiomen who weren't doing normal radioman stuff, but nobody really talked about what was happening inside the intercept rooms. It was sort of just those guys, I know they're doing something secret kind of thing.
Well, they just had some kind of cover story like, I'm just doing office work or something. Because if someone asks you what you're doing and someone says, I can't tell you, mate, that's a red flag, isn't it? It's like, well, you must be doing something. So I know some of the people at Bletchley were ending up saying they were working in a school, or they had some kind of cover story they could give. So makes sense to just.
If there was ever like an overarching cover story for these guys, I've never
found it. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Of course, they're intelligent people, so I guess they're using their own ability to just do their job and not tell. Stop! My cats are fighting next to me. We've got a new one, and they're fighting. Stop it, boys! Right, we'll move on.
So, by February of 1941, 25 classes had gone through the on the roof gang training on the roof of the main Navy building, and you can see some class photos here. Not all of them had their photographs taken, but there are some more famous names in the on the roof gang, and some of them are in these photographs. But again, 25 classes, 176 Navy and Marine Corps radiomen go through this training on the roof before it's finally shut down in February of 1941, and it is shut down primarily because they wanted to train more people in this intercept, and that little tiny classroom wasn't enough. So training,
they just outgrew it. Yeah,
they outgrew it, and training moved out to Bainbridge Island in Washington State. So the 176 folks had completed this training, and they made up the group of people known as the On the Roof Gang. And famously, in November of 1941, something called the Winds Message began to take shape in the U.S. Navy radio intelligence community. And it was first intercepted in November of 1941, where an intercept station in Washington State intercepted directions to the Japanese merchant fleet that said, if we go to war, these are the messages that we're going to send out. And one was east wind rain, for instance, which would mean that the Japanese were going to war with the United States. And there were other coded weather messages like that if the Japanese were going to go to war with Great Britain or with Russia. And so they intercepted these directions, and right at December 1st, 1941, the Japanese Navy changed their operations code. So everything that the U.S. Navy on the roof gang was intercepting was no longer able to be decrypted. So all they had to go by was this in the clear winds message that would potentially be sent out to the Japanese merchant fleet. There was a lot of talk about potentially the U.S. Navy actually receiving this winds message. Fact is, the most authoritative sources have determined that an accurate actual winds message was never intercepted. Therefore, the U.S. really did not have any foreknowledge of the attack on the United States at all, and specifically not at Pearl Harbor.
And dumb question, the Japanese change of codes, was that something that they did because they know that Pearl Harbor is happening themselves, or was it just a routine change because they've been using the same code for a certain number of months or years? Or do we not know the answer to that?
They had changed their codes a number of times before. So the Red Book code that we had from 1918 eventually changed to something called the Blue Book code. I can't remember the exact year, but it was in the 20s. And Agnes Meyer and Joseph Roshford and others helped to break that new code. But the code change in December of 1941 was a major change. It was when the Japanese Navy changed to JN-25. I think it only makes logical sense that they did this on December 1st of 1941 because they knew that they were going to attack Pearl Harbor, right?
Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
So we all know what happened on December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. On the same day, although the next day, technically, because of the international dateline, the Japanese Navy and Marine Corps also attacked other locations around the Pacific, including locations where we had our intercept sites. So Oahu was where our intercept site at Hia was. In Guam, we had Station Baker, and in the Philippines, we had Station Cast. Now, they attacked at other locations too, but because I'm focusing on the roof gang, I wanted to bring the fact that all three of these locations were attacked by the Japanese military on the same day. Now, well, let's go to the next slide, and we'll talk about each of the locations. At Station Baker,
and just stop that. Just recapping there. So the code has just changed. Pearl Harbor has just happened, and several of the listening stations have now in places that have been attacked. So it's like all the hard work of the previous almost 2 decades not having to start again, but it's like half of it is wiped away in a matter of hours, essentially.
Yeah, no, that's a really good assessment. And if you look at the first few months of the war, I don't say it's a one-to-one relationship, but certainly the Japanese Navy had their run of the Pacific in the first few months of the war. In fact, not until we get to the Battle of Coral Sea or Midway later does the U.S. Navy enjoy any success whatsoever. And that's just about the same time where the U.S. Navy codebreakers were starting to get some traction and learn a little bit more about JN-25, and when we had to reconstitute some of our intercept capabilities. And I'll get to that in just a few minutes. But the intercept site at Station Baker in Guam was overrun. The Japanese Marines stormed the beach, and they overtook the entirety of the island. That included about 400 to 500 U.S. Navy and Marines, U.S. sailors and Marines stationed in Guam, and the 8 on the roof gang operators that happened to be at Station Baker. They were taken as POWs. And this is a very compelling story that's told in detail in volume 2 of my book. They were taken as POWs, and they spent the entirety of the war as POWs.
Again, that human interest that your book brings, that some books on code breaking don't kind of have the time or space to go into, but it just makes it a good read for everybody, be you interested in code breaking or just the lives of people who fought for their country.
Yeah, right. So in Hawaii, although Pearl Harbor and other locations around Oahu were destroyed by the Japanese attacks, luckily the facility at Hia was left unscathed. So the on the roof gang were fine at Hia, despite being very close to Kaneohe naval base, which was attacked, not quite destroyed, but attacked, right across the Kaneohe Bay there. And right after the turn of 1942, Station Hypo moved one more time, this time to a much higher location, as one of your listeners already indicated, to a location where intercept would be much better, higher in the hills.
Super.
And this is a photograph inside the intercept site at Station Hypo. Again, the only photo I've ever found inside of the intercept site, with some of the on the roof gang sitting at their intercept positions.
Brilliant photo.
Yeah. And then at Corregidor Island, although it had been attacked, Marines hadn't stormed the beach at Corregidor Island. Corregidor was much more hardened facility because of the U.S. Army headquarters on Corregidor Island, and it was a much more difficult target for the Japanese. However, the Japanese did lay siege to the island, and they bombarded the island. So there was a problem, right? We already lost one of our intercept sites. Do we want to lose another intercept site? The U.S. Navy decided that they didn't want to lose all of these intercept operators to being POWs. There was somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 intercept operators on Corregidor Island at the time, instead of the 8 that were in Guam. So the U.S. Navy actually sent 2 submarines in 3 trips to evacuate everybody out of Station Cast, and they did it at nighttime. And these submarines encountered Japanese destroyers as they were trying to escape the waters around Corregidor Island. Again, very, very compelling stories about these men and how they escaped Station Cast.
Yeah, I just should emphasize, folks, that the Matt has written 2 big, thick volumes about this story. So in the hour and a bit, or whatever we're going to give it tonight, we are giving you very much the greatest hits album to kind of convey the basics of the story. But I urge you to go out and get the fuller story in your own time with reading. But it's what we're doing so far is just really, really good.
Yeah, thanks for the plug. So the all of the operators from Station Cast were evacuated via submarine, as I mentioned, and they were all brought via different paths to Melbourne, Australia, on the southern shore of Australia, where they reconstituted into a place called the Fleet Radio Unit Melbourne, or FRUMEL. And this is where the code breaking that supported General MacArthur happened. At least the U.S. Navy's version of the code breaking happened at this FRUMEL, and you can see the intercept site on the right, the right side photo. The left photo is FRUMEL specifically. The right photo is the intercept site at Moorabbin, I think it is. It's one of the intercept sites in Australia, and that again, that's the photo of FRUMEL. So a place called Monterey Barracks. And just to bring Roshford back into the story here, because he becomes more prominent in the months to come. Just like Fleet Radio Unit Melbourne was called FRUMEL, the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific was at Pearl Harbor, and this is where Roshford always was stationed. He was at FRUPAC. It was alternatively known as the Combat Intelligence Unit, but again, Roshford, the Navy's probably preeminent wartime codebreaker, was stationed at Pearl Harbor at a place called FRUPAC. And at about that same time, early 1942, the U.S. Pacific Fleet started to send out small teams of intercept of these on-the-roof gang operators on board ships to give the ships direct cryptologic support for the battles that they were going to be encountering. And there would be 2 to 4 intercept operators that came from Station Hypo in Wahiwa, and a language officer from FRUPAC. And they would go on board these ships, and again, they become very important, starting with my next slide. The first time this radio intelligence unit was used was in the first U.S. Navy raid on mainland Japan, and that's famously known as the Doolittle Raid. Certainly, Doolittle and his team of Army Air Force pilots deserve all of the credit for daringly attacking over Tokyo and other locations. The U.S. Navy Radio Intelligence Unit, the on-the-roof gang operators on board USS Enterprise at the time, actually keyed in Admiral Halsey to the fact that they had been detected, that Imperial Japanese Navy picket ships had detected the task force, the U.S. task force, which forced Halsey to actually launch these B-25s 200 miles earlier than they had planned. So the plan all along was for these B-25s to take off 400 miles from shore, drop their bombs, and then land somewhere in free China. The Doolittle Raiders knew all well that they didn't have enough fuel to get from where they were 600 miles from Japan and then into free China. So they all took off knowing that they didn't have enough fuel to accomplish their mission, but they all agreed to do it anyway. And again, the on-the-roof gang provided the indications and warning, provided the information to Halsey to be able to make that decision to launch them early.
So it seems to me, Matt, we're kind of at the point of the talk where we're like with yesterday with David Kenyon talking about Bletchley and D-Day, in that we're going from the understanding what the enemy are saying to being able to make predictions from it and now do things affected on that, which is, of course, the whole point, isn't it? It's all very well listening in, but being able to act and predict is the key thing. And I think that it seems that we're in that kind of turnover point there. And we refer to that as ultra in what we're getting from Enigma, but within the US Navy the information being acquired, does it kind of have an overriding name, or is it just part of SIGINT?
It's just all part of SIGINT. Now, some of it was processed with the purple machines, right? The purple machines were the diplomatic codes that the U.S. Navy and U.S. Army actually intercepted. That was all the diplomatic codes. The Navy codes, some of them were intercepted. Some of them were encrypted. Some of them were not. So when these radio intelligence units were out at sea and copying the tactical Japanese Navy communications, inasmuch it was in katakana and you needed special skills to be able to copy the katakana. After you did copy the katakana, it was unencrypted, so it could be read by the language officer that was on board. But yes, you're right. Being able to intercept and understand is a far reach to then operationalize it, right? Make operational decisions. And this Doolittle Raid was really the first operational raid that happened because of the intercept that
tangible results. Yeah,
that's right.
And it's slightly off subject because we talked about it a minute or two ago. But another good question from Chris. We talked about the intercept sites that were either attacked from POWs or the ones on Corregidor where the men escaped. But did the Japanese in any of those places find any equipment or paraphernalia that would give them information about what the US Navy were doing, or did they manage to destroy that stuff before leaving?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the two sites that the Japanese had access to during the war were Guam and the Philippines. One where they sacked it. One where they eventually came to take over the tunnel. Now the intercept site at Guam was destroyed by the operators before the Japanese were able to take over. They actually burned down the building. They smashed all their equipment. They burned all the paperwork, and then they headed into the jungles to try to escape the Japanese. So that site was relatively unusable by the Japanese military, and they never found out what was going on there. That was later confirmed, by the way, by on-the-roof gang operators who visited later in the war after the U.S. Navy took back Guam. We went back over to where Station Baker was and confirmed that the Japanese military had never even visited the site. Now, the tunnel at Corregidor was a different story because they had not destroyed that tunnel. They just abandoned it. They did take as much of the equipment that they could. They took their antennas away. They took the purple machines away. They took their specialized typewriters away. So there was only at this point a hope that Japan would not determine what we did at that site. There's no way to confirm that. Japan actually did use that tunnel during the war, but they used it to store explosives. And later, when the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps and Army actually stormed Corregidor Island to take it back, there was a battle outside of the tunnel, and there were some shells from U.S. Army tanks that were lobbed at the tunnel entrance, and there was such an explosion at that site that the entire place was destroyed. It actually destroyed one of the tanks, famously flipped in the air a couple of times and landed upside down. But the tunnel was destroyed to a point where nobody could tell what Japan was actually doing, other than storing explosives there.
Well, I'll just throw another couple of questions out before we move on, because they're just really good questions. So the Great Dominion over in Canada is saying, I'm wondering if the George Tweed story, he was dramatized in the movie No Man is Lion, was a member of the radio intercept unit on Guam. And I watched that film not that long ago. So was he or was he not, Matt?
That is a great question, and it is covered in volume 2 of my book. I'll give you a little bit of
it's in the book there, GD.
No, so here's the true story. George Tweed was not a member of the On the Roof gang. He was a radioman stationed on Guam. George Tweed did have a role to play in the overtaking of Station Baker. He was actually the radioman who was tasked to bring some radio equipment from Agana, the capital city in Guam, and bring it up to Station Baker, so that he and the On the Roof gang operators could take it up to a high point in Guam and communicate with headquarters at Cavite Naval Base and Pearl Harbor. Tweed showed up, and as he saw what was going on, he saw the On the Roof gang destroying their own site, and he saw the battle that was happening down at Pitti Naval Base. He actually took off. He abandoned the On the Roof gang. And if you talk to the On the Roof gang, who were later taken as POWs, they blamed Tweed for getting caught when they did. So no, he was not a member of the On the Roof gang. And as a matter of fact, the On the Roof gang held Tweed partially responsible for their capture. Now, I don't.
Well, there's a remake of the movie there, and a real version on the cards there. Let's plan that. Yeah. Well, thanks for that information. And another quick question. We'll do this one quick, and then we'll move on, from Janet Oakley. So it's all previous guests coming on asking questions. Very simply, were Japanese Americans ever allowed to participate in this scheme?
No. There were no Japanese Americans as part of the On the Roof gang. I couldn't tell you whether or not there were any code breakers in general that were Japanese descent. I don't know the answer to that question. I've never come across it, but certainly there were no Japanese Americans as part of the On the Roof gang. They all went through a vetting process, and that vetting process included, some security questions, and so no, none of them were Japanese Americans.
Trent Talenko, who's talked on our show previously about radar intercepts in Australia and what have you, he's saying the US Air Force, 5th Air Force, had NISI people with the SIGINT role. So there were some in theatre, but in a different department, different service. So, but anyway, thanks for that additional information there, Trent. As usual, you come through with that level of detail that I've come to expect from you, my friend. So let's go on to the Battle of the Coral Sea, because we're right into the heart now of the information that's being acquired and its use. So people are really loving this show. The level of detail in the sidebar is, as usual, extraordinary. So we'll keep on going.
Yeah, so the U.S. Navy was making some inroads into the JN-25 codes, and by March or so, they were starting to read more and more of the encrypted naval communications. Now, by the Battle of Coral Sea, it certainly wasn't the majority of the codes of the encrypted communications, but they could get a handle on what things were being talked about, because they could decrypt maybe 30 to 35% of the encrypted communications. So they were able to determine that the Imperial Japanese Navy had a focus on a place called Port Moresby on the island of New Guinea, and that was going to be their next target, and the U.S. Navy was the on the roof gang was able to tell the operational commanders that this was where they were going. This was the participants. This is how many ships were going to be there. This is how many submarines were going to be there, and we need to stop them. So sure enough, the U.S. Navy sent a task force down to the Battle of Coral Sea. On board the task force were radio intelligence units who provided direct intelligence support to the fleet, on top of the intelligence that was already provided by the decrypted communications before the battle. And while the U.S. Navy lost the USS Lexington and the USS badly damaged to a point where it could no longer fight, they were able to halt the Japanese from actually taking over Port Moresby. So this is actually known as the first time in U.S. Navy history where SIGINT, radio intelligence, radio intercept, actually played a determining role in the outcome of the battle. And again, It was all about decrypting what little they could before the battle, and then sending the radio intelligence units.
And just for the benefit of the World War II TV viewers, we now know, because you've had shows about the Kokoda Track in New Guinea and Milne Bay and Buna, that New Guinea didn't need more Japanese then. New Guinea was shit enough already in that part of 1942. So I love the fact those are sticking with this channel, are kind of connecting the dots on some of these subjects and realizing how one battle here, in this case a naval battle, was going on at the same time as there was still a whole lot of crap going on New Guinea. It's this bigger picture idea that I'm trying to build up on this channel, that there's always many plates spinning at the same time, and trying to understand these different plates is really important to understanding the importance of these events. So just absolutely brilliant stuff. So we're getting to the big one soon. We're getting to Midway.
So Midway there is so much to talk about at Midway. You could have a show dedicated to only, you can have a week dedicated to only Midway. And really not scratch the surface.
And we might be doing that next week. You heard it here. Next year, sorry, you heard it here, first, folks. I'm planning that for next June.
So by the time the Battle of Midway came up, the U.S. Navy was intercepting somewhere between 40 and 60%. I'm sorry, we're decrypting somewhere between 40 and 60% of the encrypted communications that they were intercepting. So again, they were able to determine the location of the next attack and the force composition. Now, how they determined the location of the attack is a story that is told in a couple of different movies, and I won't get into it here. But it was it's a very, very interesting story that involved Joseph Roshford at Frupac. But from my perspective and about the On the Roof gang, they were again deployed on board two of the U.S. Navy carriers as radio intelligence units, and provided direct indications and warning support to the commanders. The one of the two ships was actually famously the USS Yorktown, which had been repaired in just a few weeks since the Battle of Coral Sea. But again, Battle of Midway again there's just too much to talk about to go into any more depth than that. Again, another success for the On the Roof gang.
Yeah, and we will tackle that next year, and we'll do a whole week on Midway. So, and indeed, we've discussed this story before, the Yamamoto shoot down. But of course, there's always levels of nuance. There's always details, and different historians have different views and things. So, I'm looking forward to the On the Roof gang involvement in this story.
So yeah, so again, this happens in April of 1943. By that time, the U.S. Navy was able to decrypt a large majority of what they were intercepting. And in April of 1943, both Frumell and Station Hypo intercepted what turned out to be the itinerary of Admiral Yamamoto as he was going to visit his troops along the Solomon Islands. Again, I won't go into the operational nature of it, just that he was flying in a bomber along with some escorts, and the U.S. Navy knew exactly when and where they were going to be because of the on the roof gang. The U.S. Army Air Force sent up some fighter planes, some P-38s, and intercepted the convoy with Yamamoto's plane having been shot down.
And we have a whole show on that subject. Look back in the World War II TV archive, and you'll find that one there. We did a whole show about the death of Yamamoto, and it was rather brilliant, as I recall. So and it's wonderful because within this week about codes and code breaking, intercepts, whatever, it's important to understand there are absolute visible results from this stuff. It's not just geeks sitting in rooms who are good at crosswords, reading stuff, and kind of self-congratulating each other. It is actually providing definitive results that is influencing the outcome of the war in the theater.
Yeah, that's right, and certainly that was the value of this. And again, as I mentioned earlier, prior to World War II, we didn't have this capability, and operational commanders were not used to using this kind of intelligence. So there was a growth period within the U.S. Navy operational leadership to be able to understand that when they were given a report that was based on radio intelligence, that it actually meant that they could do something with it. And again, it took things like the Doolittle Raid and Coral Sea, and then finally Midway, to convince all of the operational commanders that radio intelligence was indeed something that they should pay attention to.
But I'm assuming there is some kind of hierarchy of the Navy and the Army and the military generally, that this kind of new magic technology is all a bit, new and they don't understand it, and far better to rely on traditional methods like scout planes and things like that, because we know now that lots of things that became established in World War II that we now take for granted, even simple things like paratroopers and commandos, the military didn't want them at the time, or the hierarchy didn't want them. They had to kind of fight to get these things through. So if you can provide clear evidence of the results of this stuff, then I assume the military is keen to put more people through the process, more people trained, but they've got to get results. It's like sports management. You don't get anything if your team loses all the time. So you've got to actually provide that hard data that it's actually working.
Right, and this caused quite a bit of friction in the U.S. Navy. As a matter of fact, you don't hear about Joseph Roshford after the Battle of Midway. That's because he was fired. He was actually fired by Joseph and John Redmond, who were in charge at the Department of Naval Communications. And when they disagreed about the location of the Battle of Midway, ultimately Roshford was right, but paid the price with his own career. He was actually fired and sent off to be a commanding officer of a tender or something like that. He was summarily fired from his position at FRUPAC.
Wow.
So just to loop in the Marines here, because they also had on the roof gang operators go through the training on the roof of the main Navy building. They also, just like the U.S. Navy had radio intelligence units on board ships, the U.S. Marine Corps also had radio intelligence platoons that were stationed in divisions before they were sent ashore, famously at places like Iwo Jima and Tarawa and other places. And another location where the U.S. military had a gap in intelligence was in the middle of China. So again, China was still embroiled in this in a war against against Japan, and the U.S. Navy had no intercept site in China anymore. So they actually sent a team of people to a location just west of Chongqing, China, known as Happy Valley, or called Station F. And they later went to other places to do direction finding and intercept of Japanese communications. So here is another example of how radio intercept actually resulted in operational outcomes. So the operators at Station Hypo in Hawaii actually started to intercept these daily messages that had a precedence indicator, had a heading, if you will, of ni, ho, hi, 3 katakana characters. And after each one of those, after that precedence indicator was transmitted, there would be a transmission of ships' call signs and locations and times. And what the On the Roof Gang figured out was that these ni, ho, hi messages actually were the next day's maritime traffic around the Japanese stronghold of Truk in the middle of the Pacific. And they were able to determine when ships were coming, when ships were leaving, and there was a U.S. Navy duty submarine that circled around the Truk atoll. And as it turns out, that submarine was always in the right place at the right time to sink the most shipping that they possibly could. And again, it was because the On the Roof Gang was intercepting these ni, ho, hi messages that the lone submarine that was on duty around Truk Island was able to have such success. And then, of course, there's the Solomon Island campaign. And that Solomon Island campaign lasted an awful long time. And certainly the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Marine Corps, the U.S. Army had some success. They had some failures. But the U.S. Navy On the Roof Gang was a part of all of it. They actually participated offshore in ships and from intercept sites in Australia and Hawaii, intercepting radio intelligence for the Battle of Tulagi, Tassafaronga, Bismarck Sea, Tarawa, you name it. And eventually, slowly, the Japanese military was being pushed north and west out of the Solomon Islands as the U.S. military had more and more success.
And is it fair to say, because we've got Dr. Andrew Boyd on tomorrow talking about some of the British role in this work, and we've talked about Bletchley yesterday, and we've talked on other shows about for example, when the Allies forced their way back into Burma in 1944, how much better inter-nation cooperation was in 1944 compared to 1942. So given that we've got code-breaking activities going on in Australia, there's the US Navy, there's what the British are, is the cooperation between the countries and the services improving as the war goes on? Is there more shared information and progression as on a kind of a broad front?
Yes, certainly. There certainly was U.S. Great Britain cooperation even prior to the war. There's a lot of cooperation specifically with regards to the Purple Machine and to HFDF, but that certainly did improve. The U.S. Navy, as they were in Australia, was sharing a lot of their intelligence with the Australians, and of course the relationship between the Great Britain and the United States was getting better as well. The one place where it did not improve very much was U.S. Navy, U.S. Army cooperation. That was a tough relationship throughout the war.
Or anything where MacArthur was involved.
That's right.
Yeah, no, but Guadalcanal, and we love talking about Guadalcanal. It's one of my favorite subjects.
Famously from the Pacific set of TV shows that is a place where the Marine Corps came ashore and took at least a part of the island of Guadalcanal, the north part of it, a place called Lunga Point. And as soon as they did, in August of 1942, the U.S. Navy sent operators to set up an intercept site from that location. And this is where they did a lot of their intercept for the Solomon Island campaign. And they were right next to Henderson Field. And I know you know a lot about Henderson Field, but the intercept site was right there, providing indications and warning and Japanese intention. And the truth is that Guadalcanal was a bloodbath for Japan. Towards the end, they had lost so many of their soldiers and Marines on board on Guadalcanal, and the On the Roof Gang and intercept operators on Guadalcanal at Station AL copied all of it.
And just for your advance notice, folks, Trent Telenko, who's watching today, is coming on next month to talk specifically about all the sort of secret goings on around Henderson Field in Guadalcanal. So that's all coming, his expert knowledge on that. So this is a deep dive, then that's a deeper dive into a specific aspect of this. And so lots of stuff going on. So brilliant stuff, as I keep saying. So the Aleutians now, we're hopping around the world quite speedily today. It's
well,
and that's why, folks, there's an awful lot we're covering today. So as again, lots more detail out there in the books, but we're kind of giving a nice big overview today.
Yeah. So as the American military was pushing the Japanese military north and west out of the Solomon Islands, they were also fighting up in the Aleutians west of Alaska, and they were pushing them south and west again towards Japanese homeland, and they did that with the help of a radio intelligence unit that was deployed to Adak, Alaska. And there was, of course, several battles: Battle of Attu and Kiska, and then later on at the Kuril Islands. And this radio intelligence unit, and you see 4 on the roof gang operators there. That's on Adak Island. And one of the protagonists of my second story is one of the kneeling gentlemen intercept operators there at Adak Island. Okay, and as I mentioned before, the intercept operators in China also moved to another location north into the Gobi Desert to get a second direction finding location. And again, this was a very compelling story about Ted Wildman and other on the roof gang operators heading north into the Gobi Island to continue their
saddles.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that rather outdated, but the Destination Gobi movie from 1953 with Richard Widmark. Great,
yes,
a bit old fashioned, but great movie. I watched that not long ago. Yeah, great story.
So while the movie Destination Gobi was not about radio and intercept operators, it was based on Ted Wildman, who was the radio intelligence operator that led the team up to the Gobi Desert. So yeah, a very interesting related story. So I mentioned earlier Truk Island, and it was the Japanese headquarters in the Central Pacific, and Operation Hellstone was a U.S. Navy effort to push them out of there. And again, it was driven a lot by intercepted radio intelligence, decrypted radio intelligence, and the U.S. Navy had an awful lot of success in February of 1944 at this Operation Hellstone, again with radio intelligence units on board the task force involved. And as time went on, from 1944 into 45, I hate to skim over these battles because they are such compelling stories, and there are humans on both sides of these battles that deserve much more discussion. But the Battle of Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf and Iwo Jima and Okinawa, these are all battles that took place with the U.S. Navy on the roof gang providing indications and warning support for all of these, again with radio intelligence units on board task force ships as they participated in these battles. The next story, about the IJN Yamato, is another fascinating story about the Imperial Japanese Navy's last hope. They believe that Japan actually believed that they could still win the war against the United States in a defining battle that they called Kantai Kessen, and the centerpiece for this victory would be their dreadnought battleship, the Yamato. The only problem with that plan is the on the roof gang was intercepting everything that the Yamato was doing and knew exactly when and where it was going to be. So the U.S. Navy sent surface ships and submarines to attack the Yamato as soon as it left port in early April of 1945. And of course, famously, the Yamato not only sunk but blew up in a huge explosion that was just immense. And again, so as the U.S. Military got closer and closer to the Japanese homeland, we started to do air raids on Honshu Island. I mention this because a lot of those raids were in places like Osaka and Hiroshima, where very close to where the U.S. U.S. Navy on the roof gang operators from Station Baker were being held as POWs. So there was always some question about whether or not the U.S. military was targeting or inadvertently targeting U.S. military POWs in any of these locations, and certainly the on-the-roof gang operators who were taken as POWs knew what was going on. They could see they could see and hear the attacks on Honshu Island. And just one last mention about the Battle of Okinawa. The USS New Mexico had a radio intelligence unit on board during the Battle of Okinawa, and was famously hit by a kamikaze, actually hit by a couple of kamikazes. And the explosion that you see happened right amidships, right where the radio intelligence unit was stationed, was doing their work intercepting. And while a lot of the intercept operators were injured, there was one whose name was Radium First Class Walter Ruggi, who actually died in the attack. So he's the only intercept operator that is known to have been killed in war, from enemy action during the war.
Wow, pretty incredible.
Yeah. Then, of course, the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki pretty much ended the war. The on the roof gang actually listened in on the aftermath of this, and the Japanese transmissions and broadcasts about that. But again, by this time the war was over, and the last slide that I'll show you is just the word about the POWs. Now the POWs, there were 8 of them, as I mentioned, who were taken from Station Baker in Guam. They all survived, all 8 of them. Although that's a pretty incredible thing given the mortality rate for POWs in Japanese POW camp. All 4 of these, all 8 of these men actually survived, and one of them not only survived. Markle Smith on the right there, his story is just so compelling. He famously, very much like if you know the old U.S. Television show Hogan's Heroes, Markle Smith actually escaped from camp, came back to camp, escaped from camp several times, and was able to perform some sabotage of Japanese military equipment and warehouses. And he was actually given a wartime commission. He entered as a POW, as an enlisted man, as an E5, and came out as a lieutenant because of his wartime commission and his exploits. And again, covered in depth in Volume 2. And the last thing I'd say is that the on the roof gang stuff was all finally declassified in the early 1980s, and the National Security Agency and the Naval Security Group dedicated a memorial to these intercept operators, these pioneers of radio intelligence for the U.S. Navy. And they invited every single one of them, at least the ones that were still living in 1983, to come to the dedication of that memorial. And it is the largest gathering of on the roof gang operators that ever happened. And of course, by now, every single one of them has passed on. There are no on the roof gang operators left.
And how many people passed through the training?
176.
Okay.
Yeah. There were 150 Navy radiomen and 26 Marine Corps radiomen. And NSA has memorialized all of these Navy heroes on their Hall of Honor. Lawrence Safford, Joseph Roshford, Agnes Meyer Driscoll, Joseph Wenger, all were enshrined into the NSA Hall of Honor. And I actually nominated Harry Kidder for the same honor in 2012. And after 7 tries, he was finally inducted into the NSA Hall of Honor in 2019. And I was
fantastic.
Lucky. Yeah,
job well done.
Yeah,
and this mirrors the whole Bletchley Park thing, in that, we were writing about Battle of Britain heroes when the Battle of Britain was still in going on. We were writing about Arnhem battles, Marines, Basilone on Guadalcanal when the events were happening. This whole aspect had to disappear for 3-4 decades and then come back again. And it's only now that we're relatively recently that these people can be given the honors and credit they absolutely deserve because of the secrecy aspect of it, which is sad that so many years passed, and as you said, so many of these members would have passed away before the recognition came about. But at least some were there. At least some could get it. And those of us who are interested in the war can at least now investigate what these people did, and not just this unit, but all the other units that were involved in this kind of SIGINT work in World War II, because it is absolutely important. And of course, here's your details of how people can get in touch with you, and the links are in the description below as well. And I'm sure you it's like anybody else. There's networking. I mean, Trent. Do you know Trent Talenko, by the way?
No, I don't. No.
I think he and you should get in touch, because some of your information overlaps. And Andy Boyd tomorrow. There's more. There's always more projects that could come out of networking. And there are the books, folks. So there's links below to buy them from Bookshop, but there's also any bookshops available, blah blah blah, and you can get in touch with Matt, and we'll do that. But I want to I think we've addressed most of the questions, but I have a couple of questions for you. One is, obviously we know that prior to, same with the Bletchley part goings on, books written 50s, 60s, 70s couldn't mention much about this because it just wasn't released. But today, when we have authors who are writing those kind of general histories, do you think the role of SIGINT and the on the roof gang is not enough in these books, or is it, when it is it incorrect or passing? I know the difficulty. People like Ian W. Toll, who wrote their trilogy about the Pacific campaign, there's a hell of a lot you've got to include. You've got to include logistics and Marine Corps and Army and Navy and every aspect of that. And as we've rattled through all the island hopping campaigns, even in 3 volumes, only so much you can put in. But at the same time, do you think right now, 2021, the kind of popular historians are covering the SIGINT role enough?
So I have 2 answers to that. First, I would say that every single one of the books that I read about the Pacific War does mention intelligence. It does mention signals intelligence, and there are some great researchers, great historians, great authors who have written about World War II and intelligence and the role intelligence played. But the On the Roof Gang story itself was below the surface all along. And the story of the code breaking, that is the decrypting of enciphered or encrypted communications, is covered better than the On the Roof Gang story. The On the Roof Gang story is very much a story about radio intelligence collection. That is the front end. All of that code breaking can't happen unless you have material to decrypt. And that material came from the On the Roof Gang. So that On the Roof Gang story, although mentioned, sporadically in a book here or there, is just something that is still riding below the surface. And one of the reasons that I want to, that I've written these books is try to get the word out there. And the second thing that I'd say about it is that the biggest misconception out there is the conflation between code breaking and radio intercept and collection. The 2019 Midway movie, while I love that movie very much, conflated the activities that Joseph Roshford was doing. I heard in that movie that Roshford intercepted this or that, and that just never happened. Roshford never intercepted a thing. He was a code breaker. He depended on the code breakers, the intercept operators, who were the On the Roof Gang, to provide him with the raw material so that he could do his code breaking. It was a separate group of people. It was a separate activity. And by and large, the two didn't know what each other was doing. The intercept operators knew that they were intercepting, Japanese communications, but didn't know what was going to happen with it afterwards. It was compartmented that well. I imagine Roshford knew a little bit more about what the On the Roof Gang was doing, but still that compartmentation was very, very strong. So again, that conflation between code breaking and intercept is something that is not well covered in any.
And I guess that the results of some of the work have been covered, because of we know Midway being the particular one that everyone knows about, but also Coral Sea and other things as well. But it's the how it was acquired, and as importantly, who acquired it, from where, and what happened to those people. It's that human interest, because I think when we have David O'Keefe back on again on Friday, I think sometimes people think that all this whole procedure, whether it's code breaking, intercepts, the whole big package, is just kind of a magic function that the commanders can kind of press a button and get this information on their desk. And of course, it has to be received, interpreted, and information taken from that and then put in a usable form. So commanders and all those stages perhaps get a bit lost in the simplicity of movies like Midway, which as long as you don't tell me that Rochefort didn't really wear a dressing gown and slippers, because I need to hold on to that fact.
No, he did.
But yeah, no, I mean, it's amazing stuff. So I mean, in terms of you've talked about your books, and all the people who were involved in this are now passed away. But what are your desires for the future? Would you like to see more investigation of this? Is there areas of this that you don't have information on, but you would like information? What next for Matt in this field?
Well, I tell you, so just to get back to something you mentioned, the human interest part of the books is really where I focused, and you can tell if you read the first book that it's really a personal story, delves deep into the character of Harry Kidder. The second book follows 4 different protagonists through the war, one at each of the intercept sites, including Markle Smith at Station Baker, who was taken as POW. So if you're interested in human interest, if you're interested in the human toll of the war, certainly my books will be of interest to you. Now, there are a couple things that I'm interested in and continuing research and writing. The first is a question that I've been asked a number of times during my presentations, and that is, what were the Japanese doing with regards to radio intercept, and how did that affect what they were doing, and how much did Japan know about what the U.S. Navy was doing for their intercept? This is an area that I don't know much about, and I would love to delve deeper into that. And to be completely blunt and honest, I'd love to see the On the Roof Gang books made into a movie, because I want the story of the On the Roof Gang to be known far and wide, not only in the very small cryptologic community that exists in the United States, but far and wide to people who are generally interested in World War II, or generally interested in history, 20th century American history. I'd love to get that story more out there widely.
Well, we've done a little bit tonight with the people who watched to this show, and there'll be more watching it over the next few days and weeks. So thank you very much for joining us and explaining it. I'll just remind you what we've got coming up tomorrow and the next day, and I'll come back and say goodbye to you. Tomorrow, we will actually be covering some of these same battles again, because Midway will come up again tomorrow, also Singapore, because Dr. Andrew Boyd is coming on to talk about the work of the Far East Combined Bureau. So this is kind of the British involved. They kind of moved around various places as well, including Africa and Ceylon. We'll do all that tomorrow. So Andy Boyd has sent me his information today, another deep dive into the British role in the Far East. Then on Friday, our final show in Codes and Code Breaking, David O'Keefe is coming back on again much later. It starts at 9 p.m. UK time, that one, because of David's teaching obligations. And we're going to kind of answer questions about Ultra or Code Breaking or Enigma. It might go off into some rabbit holes, because David O'Keefe and I, when we get talking, can disappear down all sorts of rabbit holes. And I will possibly be drinking an adult beverage while that show is going on. So do stick around for that. As usual, folks, don't forget the links are in the description below. Some people don't kind of remember to kind of click the expansion bit to get all the links there, where the books are, Matt's website, all there below. But right now, it remains me to say thank you very much to Matt for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it, because we certainly enjoyed it. And I've already talked to you before going live. We can maybe come back and bring you on for a panel discussion about this work, or SIGINT or something. I'm working on various ideas, but I will be in touch. But did you enjoy it?
I had a great time. This is, as I said, this is what I like to do, is to spread the word about the On the Roof Gang. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Big fan of the show, and thanks very much.
Well, thank you for joining us. So this is Paul Woodadge for World War II TV saying, I pressed the button too early. I will see you all again tomorrow, same time, 7 p.m. UK. Andrew Boyd, Far Eastern Combined Bureau. I will see you again. Thank you for your time today. This is me going off, and I'm recording a podcast with someone else later on. So no rest for the wicked. Cheers, everybody. See you tomorrow.